Well, it's pretty tough times we're living in right now, and I can't think of a better time to do top 10 pandemic movies. Let's do this. What is up, guys? It's top 10 time again, and I hope you guys are staying safe out there. It's pretty crazy right now. We've never seen anything like this in our entire lives. It's insane. But I thought, to keep you guys entertained, how about I do a top 10 pandemic movies? But just to set the ground rules before I go into this, what identifies as a pandemic? Obviously, you're going to see a lot of like zombie movies on here, but I pretty much took it as anything that could cause like a global outbreak. It could affect the nation globally, you know, because of like a chain of events or whatever. So look at it that way. I even like posted one of my choices on Killer Flicks and asked them if you would consider this pandemic, and overwhelmingly they said yes. It just gives me more options to put on here for you guys too, you know. Also, you will not see Outbreak or Contagion on here because those are not necessarily horror movies. I might be wrong for not putting them on here. I wanted to keep this like strictly horror, or as close to horror as possible. But those are great Outbreak movies if you want to check those out for sure. So anyway, let's get right down to it. I'm going to give you one honorable mention on this one. It was a tough list to put together because I didn't want to just fill it with zombie movies, you know? What's the point? Actually, you know what? I'm going to give you two honorable mentions. One just came to mind, and I'm going to do that. And that's going to be 28 Weeks Later. I actually prefer 28 Weeks Later over 28 Days Later, but I think 28 Days Later might be the more important movie. And also, it's more unconventional, just the way it's filmed and everything, because it was filmed on like standard video. It almost feels kind of like found footage. You know, I know they shot this with very low budget types of cameras, but 28 Weeks Later, it's a more entertaining type of movie. I think it feels bigger, but it doesn't sacrifice emotional moments. I think this movie has even more emotional moments than 28 Days Later, actually, especially when the husband finds his wife that he deserted at the beginning of the movie. That's a very powerful moment, and then him becoming a zombie himself, or an infected. Okay, I know I triggered some of you because I referred to this as a zombie movie. Technically, not a zombie movie. We'll call him the infected. And then the other honorable mention that I did have on the list was The Girl with All the Gifts. And I think this is one that might have slipped by a lot of you. And I think it's a very interesting one because it revolves around these children that are kind of hybrids because their parents were infected. So they're still human, you know, they still function normally, but they do crave flesh, especially when it's like right there in front of them. And so their blood is needed to find a cure for this infection. But I think this one works very well too because it deals with children. You know, I always try to throw at least one movie that has like creepy children in it. I don't know why, maybe it's a thing for me, but these children are creepy because they seem very nice and sweet, but then, you know, if you put your flesh like within 6 inches of them, they become crazed lunatics, and I like that about it. Okay, jumping into the top 10, I'm so glad I was able to put this one on here. Thank you, Killer Flicks. Night of the Creeps. Night of the Creeps is one of my favorite zombie films. I like a zombie movie that's fun, that's not necessarily overly dramatic. Even though I hate to use the word overly because that would be a very dramatic situation. But Night of the Creeps, it's a lot of fun. It involves these slugs that came from this like alien spacecraft, and the slugs find their hosts. And so it spreads. And so that's why this qualifies in there, because as the movie goes on, more and more people are infected. And it's interesting too that the beginning of the movie takes place in the 50s, and then they were able to freeze like patient zero. But then 30 years later, he comes out. But what's fun about Night of the Creeps too is you got Tom Atkins in there. The iconic line, "Thrill Me." It feels like a high school movie too in parts. The main characters are extremely likable, like, you know, like Michael J. Fox likable in the 80s. So a lot of fun to be had with this movie, actually. Number 9 is going to be I Am Legend. I recently had this on another top 10 too, actually. But I think it's a great pandemic movie because it's one of those where you have one person. So it's a great isolation type of movie. You know, he's like the only human, and at night, all these creatures come out, you know, the infected. So Will Smith, probably one of the most likable leading men in Hollywood. He plays Dr. Robert Neville. But I liked him in this movie, I didn't really like the CGI in The Infected, but I really liked him as a character. He was really everything that hinged on this movie and made it work. Especially like that scene where his dog, he has to like put his dog to sleep. Brutal stuff. And if I can give you a little story, I was actually under that bridge when they were filming the scene with him and the dog. Because we were actually in New York at the time and visiting family. And so we were literally walking under that bridge, and I noticed up there that there was a taxi cab hanging over the side of the bridge. And at first I thought, oh, what happened? Was there an accident? And sure enough, everybody's like, no, they're filming a Will Smith movie up there. About 18 months later, I Am Legend comes out, and sure enough, there was the scene with the cab hanging over the side. So that was kind of cool. Number 8 is Resident Evil. This is like a cheeseburger throwaway series. A lot of these movies are crap, but I actually like the first one quite a bit. I like the third one actually too, because it feels a little different. It's got like a Western vibe. But this first one, I like how contained it feels, how you have this nice house, and Alice wakes up, she doesn't remember anything. And so she's putting the pieces together as the story progresses. We find out a lot of information along the way that we didn't know at the beginning of the movie. And I like the hive setting, how they got to go down and then they got to come back up. But the first one's really good actually, and it took me a few watches to really appreciate it. And I'm a big Mila Jovovich fan too. I think she is a very underrated actress, and I think her work in this movie is really good. Oh, and who can forget that like corridor scene where she's walking through and you have like this security laser coming through, and it like slices anything that it comes across. Probably one of the most iconic scenes of the movie. Number 7, a movie that I saw a couple years ago, Train to Busan. And this was one of the first few South Korean movies that I really got into. And this one feels very like big budgeted, and this has zombies in it, but they can run, kind of like in 28 Days Later. I mean, they're running at a super high pace, and like mad kudos to the camera work in this movie and the direction, because it really shows you like the volume. The infected, they're like jumping all over each other, just piles high. And so it really feels big and very deadly and threatening. I think at the core of this movie is the emotional connection between this father and the daughter. I think that's like the anchor of the movie, and it makes it work so well. Number 6, It Comes at Night, and I really, really love this movie, and it had really mixed reviews. A lot of people didn't really like it, or they didn't really get it. I hate to say that, but it just didn't sit well with like half of its audience. And I like this movie because it's like the idea that there is a virus out there. We don't really know exactly what is out there. We know something is out there. We know that there was some kind of infection. But the main characters of this movie, they are completely paranoid. And I think a big aspect of this movie is fear. They have like this red door in the movie that they can only come in and out of. And so they have this couple that comes into play. And so then the paranoia and the trust is like to the max. But amazing performances in this movie too. Without giving any spoilers away, I really like not knowing what it was. And this is one of those movies that really stays with you. You have a lot of like questions lingering. It allows the viewer to kind of fill in some of the gaps. It does give a lot away at the end that you need, so I think there's the payoff there, but it still is kind of ambiguous. But that scene where you got Joel Edgerton coming up to the tree, he's got the guy tied up. I think that one scene, compared to everything else in this countdown, reminds me of what we're going through right now. That paranoia, and he's got that mask on. When we go to the store, we're trying to keep our distance from everybody. Everybody's got these masks. And that really reminded me of our current state as a society. Number 5, this is the movie that I picked for Killer Flicks, The Faculty. I really wanted to put this movie on there because there is that possibility of an outbreak. It's another one of those alien invasion types of movies, but it's not like Independence Day style. It's very contained, and it starts off in this little small town at this high school. And I like that idea. What if aliens, they actually came in through the back door? They came in through our small towns through this high school and then worked their way out. I think that makes more sense actually, instead of like blowing up the Empire State Building. But this is another one of those great movies about paranoia. But another thing I love about it too is the characters. It takes place in high school. That's always irresistible to me anyway. Elijah Wood, Josh Hartnett, so many big stars in this movie. And, you know, the work is right there on the table. They do such a great job playing off of each other. It's so fun. You know, this is another movie on this countdown that is just really, really fun. And I think there's a reason why we're still talking about The Faculty somewhat 25 years later. It's just a really fun, great movie. And I do like that aspect of like these aliens are constantly wanting water. Like you see Robert Patrick at the water cooler and just constantly drinking water. I don't know why I like that, but I think it's cool. Number 4, here's a movie that you probably didn't even think about. The movie is Doomsday, directed by Neil Marshall. And this is definitely a love letter to movies like Escape from New York. It's a very similar plot actually, but instead of criminals, it's an actual virus. There was this like outbreak. And so to keep everybody contained, they keep them in this big city. And so like 25 years later, the outbreak finds its way out. And so they send Rona Mitra in there to try to find the cure for the outbreak, which is kind of a scary plot, but it still works. But this movie is a lot of fun, actually. You're going to see a lot of winks and nods to especially Escape from New York and even Carpenter himself. It feels like a Carpenter movie, even like the score. But this movie made me think, why isn't Rona Mitra bigger than she is? Because she was great in this, actually. I think she's a great leading lady. And especially like an action star. Rona Mitra could have been a great action star, actually. But also you got these like cannibals in the movie. There's some crazy stuff going on in this movie. And there's a lot of surprises along the way. But, you know, it's a wild ride. And it's fun. Number 3 is, I'm going to put a remake on here because I haven't seen the original. George Romero's The Crazies. I love the remake so much, and I haven't even bothered to check out the original because I've heard really mixed reviews about the original. It's not like Dawn of the Dead, where you know you have to watch the original of that movie. But The Crazies, for some reason, I guess the original just didn't hold up as well as Dawn of the Dead or even Night of the Living Dead did. But I just love this story. I like the idea that they're not your normal, typical zombies, the infected. As soon as they're infected, it's like their empathy is completely gone. You know, they're completely apathetic to society. You know, they're even like murderers. You know, you have that great scene at the beginning of the movie, small town. I like horror movies that are set in small towns, but they're having like the baseball game, and then, you know, the infected comes up. This is a guy that's a friend to everybody. You know, in small towns, everybody knows everybody. So what do you do when one of them comes up and he just tries to kill you right in front of everybody? And he's trying to kill the cop, you know, the town sheriff, played by Timothy Olyphant. And so that one scene right there really sold this movie. Like after that scene, I was like, I am in. This is really profound, and I love this movie actually. But it's a movie that gets really, really intense along the way. And again, it's another, you're going to hear me say the word paranoia constantly in this top 10, but this one really utilizes that aspect of pandemic movies. Number 2, 28 Days Later. I put 28 Weeks Later at the beginning, but I think both these movies are extremely important, and I love that both these movies are very different in tone. You know, they're both very chaotic and crazy, but 28 Days Later is much more small scale. And I do think it's the more important movie of the bunch. 1, because it's the first, and just 2, because of how contained it feels, how it's filmed. Cillian Murphy is excellent in this movie. You know, that opening when he wakes up in a hospital and there's nobody around. Very similar scene in the beginning of Resident Evil, and I'm sure that they got that idea from this movie. You know, can you imagine that though? Just like waking up, you don't know how long you've been out, there's nobody around, it looks like there's been chaos everywhere, and you just walk out into the, like, say, Times Square, and nobody's there. That's the way the beginning of this movie is. And then I gotta highlight, like, one scene in this movie that really floored me is probably in like the first third of the movie when he finds these 2 young characters. There's one moment where one of the characters realizes that he is infected. You know, just a single drop of blood dropping on you, you're infected with the rage virus. And so without hesitation, she chops him up. She kills him. And that scene, the first time I saw it, I was just like startled, like, wow, that was intense. They didn't sell it with some like jump scare music. No, it was about human emotion. Human emotion is what made that scene really terrifying. It's almost like, you know, your family, your loved ones killing each other because of that fear of the contagion. And then, of course, number 1, I got to give this one to the original Dawn of the Dead. I think Dawn of the Dead, it really showcases chaos and paranoia and really just trust. This movie highlights that aspect of society and how there's a line that the Joker says in The Dark Knight. You know, these people, when the chips are down, they'll eat each other. And it almost makes me wonder if Nolan was thinking a little bit of Dawn of the Dead when he made that line, because that's exactly what Dawn of the Dead is about. Sure, it's about the zombies, but it's also about, apathy of society. When the chips are down, we don't care about each other at all. All we want to do is survive, and we want to protect our own families. And anybody else that gets in the way of that, screw them. And that's a really grim outlook on life. I'm sure not everybody's not like that, but that's one thing that George Romero liked to explore, those themes of, society and why we treat each other like that. Why is it that we only want to protect ourselves and nobody else? Nobody else matters. When, in fact, we all know that if we do the right thing, don't take all the toilet paper off the shelves, that in the long run, it's better for society. But we always seem to let desperation take over. So that's why I love Dawn of the Dead. It explores those themes better than any movie I've ever seen, really. Can't believe I haven't reviewed the original Dawn of the Dead yet. Anyway, guys, that's it. That's my top 10 favorite pandemic movies. Let me know your favorites in the comments. I'm sure I missed some. Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day, and on Fridays we do Free For All Fridays. Follow me at Drumdums on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and Drumdum out.